is Julia Sherman. I'm the education coordinator for Big Sky Film Institute. We'll do official introductions and start everything off here in just a moment. So hold tight, everybody, and we'll try to get as many more schools in here and do introductions here soon.
You know, I wonder if you could ask them a couple of questions, just thumbs up, thumbs down, about if they've seen the movie.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea.
You know, that kind of thing, just kind of warm up the discussion.
Yeah,
a little
were you
bit
guys?
While we're waiting.
This is Cut Bank tapped in. Were you guys able
that's
to?
Sealy.
Oh, Sealy. Sorry. Were you guys able to watch the film ahead of time?
Thumbs up.
Have you seen the film? Let's see a thumbs up if you can. Oh, thumbs down. So you guys weren't able to see it, which is totally fine. We'll be showing a clip of the film, just a portion of it to kind of give you a sense of what the film is about, and we'll talk a little bit of backstory of the film for those of you that weren't able to watch. We have a few other classrooms from Arlee and Glacier, and they'll be participating in the conversation as well. Just to give you guys a little background. So we work with Inspired Classroom to tap into classrooms from across the state of Montana. And we're able to have all of you participating classrooms engage with each other and voice your own opinions and deep dive into the content of the films that we'll be discussing. Hey, Shane.
Okay.
We've got a seat here right in the middle. Perfectly framed. Great. So I think we'll get started now that we've got everybody here. As I said, my name is Julia Sherman. I'm the education coordinator here at Big Sky Film Institute. This is our third year with our Native Filmmaker Initiative Film Club. And this is our first film club of the season, starting off with a film called In the Spirit of Oct.2019. And with me today, I have Roy Bigcrane and Shane Margu. Is that how you say your last name? Morgeau.
Close enough.
And also with us, joining us from the Office of Public Instruction, is Indian Education Specialist Mike Jetty.
Hello.
And so as we have a handful of schools joining us today, before we kind of jump into the film clip that we're about to screen about the film, I wanted to give a little backstory about the film, since we have a few classrooms that haven't seen it. Roy or Shane, do you want to give a quick synopsis or background on the film before we show the films a clip, or the classrooms a clip from it?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Roy.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Sure. Okay. Well, quick synopsis. It's really important for us to tell our story from the Salish and Kootenai tribes, and which is why it was so important to have Roy Bigcrane part of this project, because he was the great-great-grandson of Oct.2019, and ultimately his great-grandpa, Slaw-Tati, that brought the bison over. And so we set out to set the record straight as to how the bison got over on the Flathead Reservation, and why the bison are so critically important to us as Indian people, and why we want to see those bison go on in perpetuity into the future. So we wanted to tell a story about why bison are important to us culturally and spiritually, but also talk about how they actually got over to our area across the divide over on the Flathead Reservation.
And just a little extra background, the story kind of follows Oct.2019's and his son and their contribution to the survival of the bison by bringing it over the Continental Divide, which we'll get a little bit into with the film. Roy, did you want to add anything? I know, so Roy narrates the film and is also the great-great-grandson of Oct.2019. And I'm just curious, before we start a clip, if you could talk to the students a little bit about your personal relationship to this film and how you guys had first started to get involved with it.
Well, I am the great-great-grandson of Oct.2019, a man who was trying to bring some buffalo, some bison over. I don't know if he was trying to bring them, but a way long time ago, maybe before treaty time, we signed a treaty in 1855, the Hellgate Treaty. But the camp, the band was over on the plains, and they were coming back from a hunt, and as they were coming back, a herd of bison were following the camp, and And when he got to the other side of the pass someplace, he approached the chiefs and asked if they should let them follow them back. So that was kind of the relationship that he had. If you know anything about Native people, we have a relationship with nature, with the animals, and some animals we have a deeper relationship. Each person has either called a protector, a guardian, a helper of each person, and the bison, a buffalo, was a part of his helpers also. So that was a little story about that.
Yeah, no, that's a great backstory. So before we watch this clip, we're going to show just a few minute long clip from the beginning of the film. And as students are watching, if everybody could get out a piece of paper, does everybody have access to a piece of paper? Thumbs up if you do. You could all pull out a piece of paper, and I want everybody to fold that piece of paper in half, just to kind of offer some prep questions as we're watching the film, for those of you that haven't seen it. And so as we watch this clip, I want on one side, on the left side of your paper, I want students to write notice at the top, and on the right side, wonder, to kind of organize your thoughts a little bit. And as you're watching, I want you to ask questions about what you're learning about Atatitse from this clip that I'm showing you. What is important to him? What are his values? Why did I pick this particular clip? So with documentary film and with storytelling, there's a point to everything and why we're showing what we're showing. And this film has an animated section of the film and is narrated. So with all of these details, I want you to kind of, with those observations you're making, ask some questions as to why I chose this clip and who is Atatitse and what are his values.
Are you ready?
So I think we're ready to start the clip.
They need to come off. People need to move.
Oh, yes. So why don't you wait to come on off the screen? Sorry.
So we'll join you. We'll screen this clip, and then we'll see afterwards, and then we'll open up a discussion and get your thoughts on and reflections on the clip that we just showed. So we'll have a few minutes to watch the clip, and then we'll circle back around. So we'll have to.
All right, come on over. See, you can see right here. You'll be in the middle of the screen.
This is a story about an ancient history that, at the same time, is alive right now. As tribal people, there is much that's been taken from us, but there is a lot that we have held on to that makes us who we are. Our relationship with buffalo is one of these things. There are still buffalo on our reservation, the Flathead Reservation, on land that was stolen by the federal government. This is the National Bison Range, and we have been disenfranchised from its management since its beginning. A strange irony, because the buffalo on the range wouldn't exist if it wasn't for us, and if it wasn't for Atatitse.
Him and his friends were out there on one of the more successful buffaloes. There was some buffalo that was following along.
Zij dat het zijn gekeschool. Dat ze met gekelen ze kestichten. Wat het gewoon weg. Trouw, ze leren me gewoon uit trouw. Zo is je zo is dat.
After 3 days, they were still at an impasse. So Oct.20 withdrew his request.
Jak skacze się ja. Tak jest jako jest chciał pomsteć. Konzil do kastancy to tak jako jeszcze. Nie chcę tym polityk chcę. Ja بس تقين مسيا يقاي وانا سيتسخطين كنت تخيس تخم سؤال ناس يقاي الثقافة يوصلنا شو لا تسمو قد الشعر وتعاطخي سيتسكت ويقاي يقاي بس ناسي والثقافة والتعديل.
So before we open up to kind of diving a little bit deeper into that process of making that part of the story, I would love to hear from students based on the film notes that you made from the clip that I showed you. I was wondering if I could hear from a few brave souls there what you noticed from that clip of values to Oct.20 just from that short clip there. What are things that are important to him?
Let's start with Miss Bartlett's class.
Hey, Mrs. Bartlett's class. Go ahead.
The students noticed the importance of following the buffalo, and the bison were very valuable.
Okay, so from one classroom we heard they'd mentioned that buffalo is of huge value, the land. Something that I also noticed was the respect to the elders, just from that one clip. There's anything else that you made note of Oct.20's qualities within Oct.20 as he takes initiative and engages with the elders? Maybe some observations.
From another teacher, I noticed the irony of American Indians not being involved in the administrative aspect of the bison range, even though the bison wouldn't even be here were it not for them. So that's from a teacher.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And in the film, actually, they make note of this idea of reciprocity. And I'm wondering if Shane, you or Roy can talk a little bit more about kind of what is at the heart of this move. Something that we didn't see in this clip was after Oct.20 goes to the elders, his son Tlatati moves to bring these bison back over the Continental Divide, back to what is now known as the Flathead Reservation. Can you talk a little bit about what this idea of reciprocity means and how this comes into that play with the longstanding relationship with the Salish and the buffalo?
Yeah, I can talk to that. I think it's really important, at least in that part of the film, you notice that the conversation is that the bison are on the brink of extinction, right? And we have bison, we can see them in places like Yellowstone and not Glacier, but on the Flathead Reservation, in Yellowstone National Park, and at the National Bison Range. And then you can see there's some ranches around the state now that have small bison herds, and other tribes are starting to get herds now. But at that time they were blanketing the entire country, this side of the in the Northwest, and they were on the brink of extinction. And so Oct.20 noticed that and said, we got to do something. And so you'll also notice when he brought it to the leaders at that time, there were multiple leaders of our tribes. There wasn't just, a lot of people sometimes think there's just one chief. That's not how it works today. Just like the state of Montana, we have 150 legislators that go to the state capitol. Well, just like the state of Montana, our tribes have many leaders, and we have a tribal council comprised of 10 members today. But back then, we had essentially just the people in our community that we identified as leaders, people who could lead our younger generations on into the future, just like we do today. So I think there's a lot of things to learn from that particular scene, but really what prompted the movement of bringing or trying to get the chiefs to bring the bison back over is the fact that they're about gone. And so that's one big important part of the story, is it isn't just that Oct.2019 started that conversation. It was, hey, if he hadn't done that, if he hadn't started the conversation and his son Oct.2019 hadn't came back and helped bring orphan calves over, we wouldn't have any bison on this side of the Continental Divide unless they were farmed bison, or who knows what would have happened. You know, it's all speculative, but it's really interesting to think of what we have now based on this story.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think on that note as well, we talk about this relationship to the land and to the bison. There's this, they mentioned this in the film, this kind of spiritual connection to the bison, and more than just this is an animal and we need to preserve it and we need to take care of it. Can you maybe talk a little bit more to that role of the bison today? Because this kind of traditional story comes through in modern day, and I think, as many students know, bison is a very important animal as a Montanan, and we all have very different relationships with it as an animal. And maybe after you explain, we can get some student thoughts of what bison mean, being a Montanan in the state.
So I'll let Roy talk to that, but just quickly, one other thing I think is important about that scene is that Indian people or nomadic people, we traveled across all over the state, and that's why you'll hear oftentimes Aboriginal territory, and that part of the scene, that scene of the film shows that our tribes used to travel across the Continental Divide all over the state of Montana for hunting, for travel, for meeting up with friends, all various different things. And a lot of that stuff was incorporated into our treaties. The fact that we were nomadic and that our Aboriginal territories stretched across vast areas across the state of Montana, and especially in the Sealy Lake area, where a lot of you are. I've done a lot of work up in the Sealy Lake area, talking about traditional and cultural locations and places in that area. But I'll let Roy talk to the connection, the spiritual connection of the bison. Let him speak on that.
Well, good afternoon again. Like I mentioned earlier, that this relationship that we have with bison, it's not a thing of the past. It's something that we do right now. We honor them. We honor them, and they let us use their meat to eat, to be healthy. They help us with guidance and direction. And one way that I can help show what that means is that I see you have this one classroom, you have a dog walking around. Maybe it's a service dog. Maybe you have pets or dogs at your home, and you know how that feels to you. I've seen a lot of people, they will die for their pet. Look at these people at Yellowstone, whose dog falls into these hot springs, and these people don't think twice about jumping in to try to save their dog. They put their own life on the line. And, you know, so people and their pets, that's almost like how it is with us, with nature, with bison, with the deer, the elk, the eagle, the chickadee, all of these things of nature. We have such a strong, very strong relationship that goes beyond words, because these things help us to live. It helps us to be good people. be healthy, to live that good life as best as we can as human beings. Because as human beings, we make mistakes like all people do. But if anybody's paying attention to their life, is self-reflective, meditative, and want to to be the best human being possible, we commune with nature, with these animals, and these animals who aren't dumb. They're very wise because they only know how to live by the Creator's laws and rules. They don't know how to be bad or to live contrary to this sacred life that we live. They only know one law, and that's the Creator's law. And so as human beings, sometimes we deviate from that. But nature, because it's so patient with us and forgiving, we learn from that and learn how to do what is right. And when we're having difficult times, when we're having problems with our health, the natural foods, the deer, the elk, the roots, the berries, the water animals, the water itself will heal us, helps to have good health. That's what we know. That's how we live. It's not a thing of the past. We can play at computers, drive nice cars, get big fancy degrees, but we still are who we are. That's our DNA. That's our blood. That's who we are. That's how we try to be still good human beings, still be good caretakers of the land. That's our role in this life. We haven't forgotten. We haven't forgotten. You know, there's a lot of people who have forgotten, but a lot of our people haven't. You know, life is tough enough without believing in these things, but when we have struggles and difficulties, nature helps us out. I don't know how to say that any better than that, but if you look at that, like I said, at your pets, your birds, or if you're from a ranch, you know you have a relationship with the animals. Mm-hmm. You feel very good around them because they understand you. Maybe you're having a difficult time and you go to your pets or your horse or your cattle and or whatever it is, and they understand you and they make you feel better. That's how it is with us.
Maybe we could get a show of hand from the classrooms that are participating. Do any of you have care for animals, have pets, or maybe ranch or work with animals? Do you see, I'm wondering if maybe a few students can share this relationship with your animals or a specific example of in your own daily lives where you're tending to or taking care of another being. Maybe get a raise of hands.
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy. I know all of you raised your hands.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Well, I have a dog, and I love him like my parents. I like him more, though, so.
Yeah. Did you see some similarities with how Oct.20's relationship with the buffalo and maybe your relationship with your dog, where your dog is always there for you and you have this kind of back and forth relationship? I think this is a really good opportunity to hand it over to Mike. We could tie this into Essential Understanding 3, and you can maybe set up the clip that you're about to show us with the First Nations of Montana.
Sure, well, Hamitaki Api, Alpeto Ashte. Hello, my relatives. It's a good day today. Just glad to be here as part of this discussion. And, you know, I actually wrote down a few notes during that clip too. And, you know, in Dakota culture, I'm an enrolled member of the Spirit Lake Dakota Nation. We say Mitakoyasi. Mitakoyasi. That means everything is related. Everything is connected. everything has a spirit, and nothing's better than anything else. And we, like what Roy said, we can all learn from, everything, and the plants, the animals, it can help us and heal us. And so, thinking about the Tatanka Oyate, the Buffalo Nation, and how important that is to a lot of the tribes and the people out here. And we talk about traditional beliefs and spirituality and ceremonies and songs that are tens of thousands of years old, that are still being lived by, native peoples today, not just in Montana, but across the US. And so it was really powerful. When I first saw this film in Helena, I wanted every student across the state of Montana to watch this film. And so it's really, I'm happy that you're, showing us today, Julia, or doing this as part of your institute. And so I guess with, essential understanding 3, if you're not familiar with that, it just talks about traditional beliefs and ceremonies, they're still being, practiced by people today, and how important, the bison or the buffalo are to that. And so I thought I'd show a quick film clip from a film that Montana Tourism put together, where they went out and interviewed different tribes. But Florence Garcia from the Flathead Reservation, the Fort Belknap, Fort Peck Reservation, I'm sorry, talks about this. And so I thought I'd share this real quick and maybe show a few slides. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
All right.
And then we can open up to student questions after that.
Can you see that?
No.
See it right.
Did they see
See it now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, let me go back. There we go.
In my view, the buffalo were a metaphor for our people, in terms of the buffalo were at one time plentiful, more than plentiful. And they lived their lives, and they provided life to our people. The buffalo were nearly annihilated, where, it's a blessing that we even have any true buffalo here. I see a parallel there in what happened to the buffalo and what happened to Native people in this land. Native people, at one time roamed free, lived their lives the way they wanted to, and were almost annihilated. And now we're coming back just like the buffalo. So that to me is something that just brings me so much hope.
So that clip there, I really like the analogy she made, because we think about what happened. There was hundreds of millions of bison, pre-1492 across North America. And then at one point, I think there was, less than 1,000, or maybe, hundreds. And so that's why, what happened with the people up there, with your ancestors, Roy and Shane, is so important that, you think about Fort Peck and Fort Belknap, they're getting those bison from Yellowstone Park that have that connection to the tribe up there on the National Bison Range on the Flathead Reservation. So that's powerful. But what Florence was talking about is, you think the tribes are regaining access to buffalo, revitalizing ceremonies and songs in relationship to the buffalo. And so that's powerful. And so that's kind of why I wanted to share that clip. So does that make sense?
Yeah. Do we have any questions from any of the participating classrooms on what we just saw? And maybe a few students can share what they've learned thus far about bison. Did you know in Montana kind of this history before, or share some questions or thoughts from what we've just learned?
Coming in from the stream, we have some students who are wondering about if the biologists are working like between Yellowstone Park and the Bison Range, and there's a lot of movement about wildlife management, so they're kind of wondering about how the science piece of it all works too.
Yeah, and that's actually addressed in the film. Shane or Roy, do you want to kind of speak to land restoration and animal management?
Sure. So if I'm understanding the question, is there relation between like what our scientists are doing to look into the DNA or biological relationship between the bison and in Yellowstone Park and on the reservation at the bison range. And I think there has been, at least we as CSKT, Salish Kootenai tribes, we have a bison hunt over there in treaty rights, so we're still part of the landscape, we're still part of that herd. In fact, I'm going over there in January. I try to make it over there every year, and it's a good time to spend time with friends and family. But there has been a lot of science and testing done on all of those bison, both through the federal government and also through tribal, our biologists that do blood testing and blood work on all those bison. And so they've found that the bison, at least from what I've been told, I'm not a scientist, I'm an attorney, so I'll have that disclaimer out the gate, and I'm a one of the producers on the film, and I'm not going to say I'm going to give you guys trump what your science teacher or whoever is an expert on this kind of stuff. But what I've been told is that the bison in Yellowstone and in the bison range are some of the purest bison in the world. And so when they've done testing on those bison, they found that there is very little evidence or of other species such as cattle breeding in with those bison. So so that's also a very special thing about the bison in Yellowstone and at the National Bison Range, is that we have some of the purest bison in the world. That means that we have bison to help keep those bison going elsewhere if we decided we ever wanted to do something like that. But for us, Salish and Kootenai people, for the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, right now we're focused on being a part of the herd at the National Bison Range, reuniting essentially with those bison. And so for right now, that's what our focus is, and our focus is really to educate people on why that's so important to us and why we want to be a part of, whether it's in the management aspect or being more involved with those bison there. And the last thing I'll just speak to is, when we talk about our relationship with animals, one of the things that we're still learning today is that we don't understand everything about how plants and animals communicate, that they're smarter than we even realize. And we have all the power in the world to take them away or keep them here. And so as humans, we need to really recognize that we still have a lot to learn from animals, whether, for instance, a pigs are extremely smart. They're as smart as a 3-year-old. And that always just blows my mind, that we have an animal that is so smart, and of course so tasty as well, with bacon and all that kind of stuff. But it's just one example of, there's animals in these species out there and plants that they don't speak our language, but it doesn't mean that they don't have something to say or that they're not speaking with each other.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point of this kind of back to this kind of like relationship with the animal and the land. And I know in the beginning, Roy kind of talked about the Treaty of Hellgate, and where we see the establishment of the Flathead Reservation, and with that relationship, kind of what's happened with the National Bison Range. And I'm wondering, Mike, if maybe you can give a little bit more background on what this treaty did and the tribal understanding of those boundaries were versus what was actually written out there, because I think it'll give a little bit more context to why there's been this kind of dispute here.
Sure. I'll bring up a little map real quick to show you some tribal territories in Montana. And then I'll talk about this map. Let's see here if I can do this. Can you see my screen?
Your eagle.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, we can see.
There we go. I'm trying to get this up. All right, do you see that map? And these are, what's that?
Yeah.
Yes.
These are tribal territories in Montana as defined by the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851 and 1855 treaties with the Flathead and Blackfeet tribes, the Hellgate Treaty. And so we look at this map, and I think Roy and Shane mentioned this about the Salish people who were all across Montana, but according to this map, it just says you're over there on the west of the divide. And there's a disclaimer on this map that says tribal territories defined by non-Indian officials at treaty time. Because these folks that came out here came out at a certain point in time and said, well, these people are just here at this point, not realizing that for 10,000 years, Salish people were going down to Yellowstone Park. They were going, way over to the Yellowstone. And so it was a snapshot that non-Indian folks at treaty time had, but then you see how much diminished the lands got today to the current reservations. And so I think that just to keep in your mind, at one point all across Montana was Indian country. And there was a lot of trading going on. There was a lot of, intermixing. It wasn't just everybody stayed in their own spot. And so I think that was mentioned in the film too. So I just wanted to share that map just to give you a sense of, how big, these territories were, and, that it wasn't a static thing, that there was a lot of movement going on. So,
Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
But just, thinking about what happened with the buffalo, though, as more and more people came out here there, and the intentional, slaughter of them, there was a few images in that film, and I wanted to bring this one up too, just to show you, just to kind of bring home this point. Let's see if I can get it to come up. Can you see that?
See your map.
We can see your map.
American bison.
Nope, share your other screen.
Oh, you can only see that?
We can see your map still,
Okay. Let me close that.
Okay.
How's that?
Not yet. You'll have to share again.
Oh, okay.
It's so fun learning all of this.
How's that?
Yeah.
There we go.
So you think about, the millions of bison in this brown area, and then way up into Canada, all across North America. But then, what happened, the intentional slaughter, I think it was General Sherman that talked about that, if we kill the bison, we'll eliminate the tribes too, because we're eliminating their food source. But look at this. When you look at those skulls, and it just blows you away, the amount of, slaughter that happened. And they were almost hunted to extinction. And so it's a miracle that we still have any, pure bison left. So I think, thinking about those treaties and the diminishment of land, that's why it's so important that there are places like the Bison Range and Yellowstone Park where those, genetically pure bison can still, live and keep on, giving back to the native peoples. So.
I have a question on the stream if you're...
Oh, yeah, we'll open it up to a question. We have a question on the stream here.
Yeah, so the question is, in the film, they noticed there was a lot of significance with the white buffalo, big medicine. And they're wondering, besides just it being a white buffalo, what was so important to the tribe about that?
So in the clip, this is probably from a school that saw the entire film.
Yes.
For those of you that didn't see in the film, they talk about big medicine, which is a white buffalo that was on the National Bison Range. Do you mind, Shane or Roy, speaking a little bit to the significance of that buffalo and maybe the history there?
Well, maybe Shane can explain it better than me. We know how rare it is to have a white bison, a white wolf, a white an albino. It's not a current occurrence, not a common occurrence, and we understand that, we know that it's something special, something divine, something more sacred, more holy than most things. And we believe that this was sent down to help us more, a bigger sign, like I said, something sacred and holy. And we knew that, and I don't know how to explain it any better than getting into more of the deep spiritual things that I don't know if I can be talked about in schools or not. But it is something. It's very rare, and if it's something so rare, why is it that way? We believe it's divine. And this happened on our reservation. It wasn't a true albino, but it was a white bison anyway. And it's talked about in the film a little bit, in our documentary, about what it meant. This man elaborates a little bit further on it, why it is that way, but it was kind of cut out. But it's something that I don't know how to explain it. Maybe Shane can do a better job.
What I think, you know, Vernon Finlay, who's the Kootenai Cultural Committee director now, you know, he kind of summarizes it, I think, pretty well in the film, and he essentially says, you know, it centralized, we believe it centralized a lot of the spiritual power when in our area at that time when Big Medicine was born and lived on our reservation. And so the significance is, of course, what Roy just said, speaking to, you know, the rarity and how divine and what that meant to us. But it also, you know, we were basically, once the bison were brought back over and the bison range was created, a fence was put up around it. And so we were disconnected from the bison range and being involved as Indian people with the very bison that Roy's family brought over as members of our tribes. And so what was great and important about Big Medicine was, it was, in my mind, it was a reminder that, hey, we're still here and we're still part of our community, and it brought that relationship back together to where the tribes, you know, said, hey, we're not going to give up on you guys. We're right here. We're still going to maintain our relationship, even though there's a fence, and we're not actually a part of the management of what is here on the reservation, and we're not a part of that herd still to this day. It was, to me, it was a reminder that, hey, we need to stay active, and we need to continue to come visit and be a part of the bison range in that community, and so it kind of rekindled our relationship and told us, in my mind, not to give up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the film, I think the quote is, the fence was viewed as, you know, I wrote it down here, that was as much to keep the Indians out as it was to keep the bisons in. And I think it's a really good representation of what something, and in film we kind of talk about it as like subject versus theme. We have a literal thing, but it is representative of a bigger theme. Of, you know, maybe it's just a fence, but it's more than just a fence. It's saying who's part of this conversation and kind of who's involved. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about where we're at now with this, with the National Bison Range, and kind of where things have come since having made this film, and what has it done to kind of spur the conversation around this more involved participation in the Bison Range.
One of the questions that I have in here is coming in is asking, like, the movie ends at about like 2017, and they were asking for some updates on what's happening now. So could address that too. That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the film talks about, I guess I'll go back to one thing. The fences, you know, the reason that's significant, the fact that there's, you know, a fence and a barbed wire fence around the top of fence that runs around the 19,000 plus acres in the National Bison Range is significant, because once a certain time hits, that gate's locked, and you can't be in there. You can't go for a walk in there. You know, even as tribal members and people who, we had tribal members who used to have home sites out there, who lived there. That used to be a hunting area. And it's smack dab in the middle of our reservation. And so, you know, one thing I'll say that's important to keep in mind is that, you know, our history in this country, we don't always talk about the tragic things as much as we should. And you know, one of the tragic things about the Bison Range is that was actually found to be a taking. The government essentially just came in and said, you know, this would be like, if the government came and your family owns a ranch or a house, this would be like the government coming in saying, we're taking this, you go over here, you go somewhere else, you get an apartment or something, but we're going to take this right here, and here's what we think it's worth, which is significantly less. And so the important thing about the Bison Range is that in 1970, they said, yeah, that was a taking. We did come in and take that from the tribal people there, and we're going to pay them, not in 1970 values, but we're going to pay them in 1912 value of what the land, we think the land was worth at the time, based on whether it was agricultural or commercial or whatever. So that's an important piece to keep in mind too, which is why that area is also important to us, is that it was land that was part of our reservation that we negotiated in our treaty, and it was part of our Aboriginal territory as well. Mm-hmm. Now, actually, the status of the Bison Range today is it's still, you know, we're still in discussions with the federal government and trying to have a role at the Bison Range. So I would say, you know, where the film, we've tried to enter into numerous agreements, and all of those have been roadblocked for various reasons, where the tribes have had a role. At the end of the film, it talks about, you know, the first agreement fell apart because there was false accusations about what the tribal employees were doing there, and then the second one is actually working, and then there was a third attempt, which were actually roadblocked because the federal government didn't follow certain procedures in setting up that agreement with the tribes, and so that was basically kicked out, and then we were back to this process of starting over and having discussions about certain policies that need to be followed before the tribes can have a role there. And so at the end of the film, it talks about we basically were offered the opportunity to have that land restored back to the tribes, so long as we kept it open to the public, which that's exactly what the tribes have always wanted, is to make sure that that bison herd continues into perpetuity, and that everybody, tribal and non-tribal, have the opportunity to appreciate those bison just as much as we do. And there's a lot of people, non-tribal, that appreciate bison significantly, just like Indian people do. And so, or just want to go visit them and learn more about them. And so that's something that we're committed to. And so currently the status of the Bison Range is it's still kind of in that holding pattern where the tribes are still having conversations, that we're hopeful that whether it's a management role or, you know, someday the Bison Range is restored, we don't know. It's still kind of at that status at the end of the film. It's kind of stuck in that holding pattern of conversations are still happening, but nothing has really significantly changed. And as long as I'm around, and as long as we have future generations in our legal department and for the tribes, we'll always continue to try and work to have a role and be a part of the bison, no matter what that looks like, whether it's through an agreement with the federal government to help manage them, have employees, or manage the facility altogether, or actually have the land and the bison restored back to the tribes. So it's still out there, but you know, the important piece is that you guys are the future generations, and you know, it's good for you to understand, you know, what bison mean, and what you know, many of you might have a role there at some point in the future. You know, we employ a lot of Indians and non-Indians within our government for the Salish and Kootenai tribes, and there's Indian and non-Indian employees out at the Bison Range as well. So many of you might end up having a role, whether it's through policies as a legislator or as an employee there, or just living in the area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's something I like to kind of think about is, as you're kind of thinking about this, one thing to put in perspective is who makes decision in your day-to-day lives. When you wake up in the morning, sometimes you get to decide what you're wearing for clothes, and that's kind of freedom of will. But when you get to school, it's, are you in class and you have to ask permission to go to the bathroom? And I know these are small examples, but I think they really speak to, as we, kind of progress through and get a little bit older, you have a lot more autonomy and you get to make these decisions. What does it mean to kind of ask for permission for something versus having to take something because you need it? And I think, especially within this history and the history of these treaties, a lot of my understanding at least is when these treaties were being written up, who was writing it and who is in a position of power. And I think as we kind of learn these histories, it's important to talk a little bit about that kind of power dynamic and when you feel like your voice is being heard. Do we have questions for, Mike?
Sorry, let me unmute you.
I had one other thing I wanted to share. When you said voices being heard, it made me think of something. I actually brought in my hand drum here, and this is a buffalo hide hand drum. And, we talk about ceremonies and songs. And so, this was made with, buffalo hide that's not very old. And so but for tens of thousands of years, people were making these types of drums, Salish, Dakota, Lakota, Blackfeet, and using them. So I thought maybe I'd share a quick part of a song and tell people what it means. How's that sound?
That sounds great.
All right?
Get thumbs up from the class. We got some thumbs up from the classes.
Raise your hand out there if you've ever heard the sound before. In Indian country, that's what we call the Hollywood beat. Nobody I know uses that drum beat, but some songs have a different kind of beat. But this is a really old song, and I'll sing one verse of it, but it's used in ceremonies today. And my friends back home say, it's okay to share these songs because people need to know. Because a long time ago, these songs were outlawed. And 1978 was the Indian Religious Freedom Act. And so it's good to be open with these, to let people know what these songs mean. So this is a really old song about buffalo. Hey, ya, way, ya, hey, ya, way, no, hey. Hey, ya, way, ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, hey. Hey, ya, hey, ya, way, no, hey, ya. Hey, ya, way, ya, hey, ya, hey, ya. Hey, ya, way, no, hey, ya, way, no, hey. Ta, ta, ka, ya, te, ke, ya. Ke, o, ya, te, ke. Wa, che, ni, ampelo, hai. Ampecho, ke, le, wa, ka, ya. Che, wa, kielo, namakua, hai. What that song says, Buffalo Nation, the people depend on you again. I'm praying today, I'm praying to you. Today is sacred, hear me. And so that's just a song offering a prayer to the buffalo saying, a long time ago you gave everything to us and helped us live and survive, and we need that help again. And so like with the buffalo going back to the tribes, it's a healing. It's a revitalization of these old songs, of these ceremonies, of those relationships that we're connected to everything and how we need to treat everything as a relative. And so I just wanted to, to share that with you. And when I first started singing about 30 years ago, they told me, Mike, we want you to sing solo. And I said, oh, by myself? They said, no, solo, we can't hear you. So, had to throw one bad joke in there, but I just thought I'd offer up that song for all you students out there too, because, like Shane mentioned, you're our future generations, and we depend on you as the older folks to take care of this place, and we hope to leave it in a good shape for you. And so, but we're depending on you to, take the role up and really be good stewards of the environment and good relatives to everybody around you. So that's just what I had to share.
Thank you for sharing that. But
We have a lot of thank yous on the live stream.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
lot,
just,
yeah.
There's a
just
lot
thank
of
you, thank
Oh,
you.
amazing so far.
Yeah, so I think gratitude is what the stream would like to.
I think that's a really lovely note to end on as well. And I'd love if students, they still have a piece of paper out. We would love to hear from you. And if you don't mind writing maybe 2 things that you've learned from today's discussion and a question that you still have, or something that you really resonated with you, whether it's your relationship with your animals or the land that you live on, or if you come from a ranching family. Because we have students joining us from across the state, and so if you have any specific questions, we'll open it up here before we close off here for the day. But your comments have been really lovely and your questions are very insightful.